In the last part of this lesson, we considered how cultures are all different. And so in this part of the lesson, we're going to consider the issue of characterizing and classifying cultures. So in this world, modern world, where we move around a lot, cultural differences can lead to the experience of culture shock, where we find that people in other countries have ways of performing practical tasks that look wrong to us. And Geert Hofstede, whose work we'll be considering in a moment, gives the example of an Italian delicatessen. If you go into an Italian delicatessen, you will find that there's not so much of a queue, there's just people milling around. And the shopkeeper may be serving a customer, and that customer wants some mortadella, so they get out the mortadella and they slice off some and give the mortadella to their customer, and then they say, oh, well, while I've got the mortadella out, is there anyone else who wants mortadella? Oh, you do? Yes, okay. And then they slice, here you are, and oh, you as well, right, here, and here you are. And then those customers pay and off they go, and then no one else for mortadella, right, then they move on. And to a British or German person, this looks terrible. In a British or German delicatessen, you have a queue and people get served in turn, and that's much fairer. In this Italian approach, it looks chaotic, and you may have been waiting a long time, but somebody's cutting in front of you to get them their mortadella. But the Italian would say, well, no, it's your British and German type approach is ridiculously inefficient. In your approach, the first customer, they want mortadella, so the shopkeeper gets out the mortadella, slices it off, gives it to them, they pay, then they wrap up the mortadella, they put it back, and they say, and what do you want? Oh, you want mortadella as well? Oh, right. So then they get it out again, they unwrap it, slice it again and put it back, wrap it all up again and so on. So this queuing, orderly approach, serving people one after the other, they'd say is inefficient. While you've got the mortadella out, it's going to be much more efficient just to serve everybody who wants a mortadella. So this is an example of how cultures are not necessarily better or worse, they're just different. From your perspective of your culture, insofar as another culture does something differently, you might say, well, that's ridiculous, that's a terrible way of doing it. But they would look at the way you do it and say, well, your way is terrible and ours is better. So cultures can't really be ranked, they're just different. And in the world of business, this can cause problems when you're communicating across cultures. A common example that people give is that of handling business cards. So in Western cultures, if you give someone your business card, you just get it out and, oh, here's my card, But in East Asian cultures, that can look terribly rude, terribly offhand. You just, here, bung you my business card. It seems to be treating the person with disdain, and what their approach would be to hand over the business card quite ceremoniously with both hands. Please, I would be most honoured if you would take my business card. And so if you're raised in Western culture, you may be causing offence without realising it, because you're practicing your culture to people who have a different culture. And another example in the world of business is that in some Asian cultures, it's considered very important to get to know who you're dealing with before you start doing business. So you would talk about their family and their background, their degrees, what their journey was like, and so on. But to an American, say, that seems like irrelevant small talk. And they would say, oh, well, forget all that. Let's just get down to business. Now, here we've got, these are the terms we want to stick to. And someone from an Asian culture would say, oh, that seems rather brusque and abrupt. So to deal with these issues of cross-cultural interaction, some people in the business world have suggested ways of characterizing and classifying cultures so that people can understand what those differences are. And Hofstede is one of the people to do that, in a book he wrote called Culture's Consequences. And his approach was to interview people in a business context from many countries around the world, asking them about their attitudes to various issues. And then he did a factor analysis on it. And he found originally in his book that there were 5 cultural dimensions, and he's since expanded it to 6. So let's have a look at Hofstede's model. I'll write it up. So these are Hofstede's 6 dimensions of culture. The first one is power distance, which is a measure of the extent to which people defer to their superiors. I once did some research on the effect of cultural differences on operations in multinational headquarters for NATO. And as part of that, I interviewed a British Army major who described how he had worked for an Italian colonel. And the Italian colonel, he said, would come to him with his reports to ask him to correct them. Now, this guy was only a major, so he was 2 ranks below the Italian colonel. And the Italian colonel would say to him, look, I know that really I should be going to my American deputy to ask him to look over and correct these reports. But the trouble is that he, when he looks at my reports, he just says, oh yes, that's fine, sir, that's great. And he doesn't really criticize them. But the trouble is that, as an Italian, my English isn't that great. And I know these reports are going to be full of grammatical mistakes and all sorts of errors. And I don't want to embarrass myself. So, would you mind going over them and making those corrections? And someone like Hofstede would say, well, this is an example of the different power distance in the 2 cultures, American versus British. American culture has a high power distance. So the American officer would feel it was wrong to criticize his boss. You just don't do that. Whereas British culture is a low power distance culture. And so this British major had no problem in pointing out all the errors and mistakes in his boss's report, even though he was 2 ranks above him. So that's power distance. Then individualism, collectivism. So this is about whether we see people as individuals who are just responsible for their own actions, or whether we see them as members of groups and judge them by their group membership and judge their actions as to how that reflects upon their group. The next one is masculinity, femininity. So by this, Hofstede really means competition, competitiveness versus cooperation, cooperativeness. So cultures can vary to whether people are very competitive or to whether they prefer to be cooperative. Then uncertainty avoidance. So this is whether we tolerate ambiguity or whether we like things to be planned out and very orderly. So, for example, the Italian delicatessen, there's a bit of uncertainty and ambiguity there. The British or Germanic cultures prefer things to be orderly. There's a queue, it's predictable, we know when we're going to be served. Another example is that, some cultures, they're not very great about timekeeping, but they don't mind, because if their visitor is late, then they've got other things to do, so they can fill in the time. So it doesn't really matter to them. They might have made an appointment for 10:30, but if the guy turns up at 11, they don't resent it, because they've used that time to do whatever else it might be. Whereas, Germanic type cultures would not like that. If you say you're going to be here at 10:30 and you're here at 1 minute past, you've already made a mistake in their view. The next one is short-term to long-term orientation. So do people live in the present and just um, uh, meet their immediate needs, or do they save up and plan for the future, and so maybe sort of hold back for future rewards? And the last one, which is one he added, and it seems to me a little bit kind of overlapping here, but if we read his work in detail, he'll explain why it seemed to come out differently in the factor analysis, is that of indulgence versus restraint. So indulgence means, you know, you just enjoy life and that's your priority, and restraint means self-control, self-discipline is most important to you. Now, another pair of researchers who've also done this kind of thing for classifying cultures in the world of, or particularly for the world of business, is Fons, Trompenaars and Charles Hampden-Turner in a couple of books called The 7 Cultures of Capitalism. So looking at, you know, American versus Japanese versus German, etc., capital approaches to business. And also a book called Riding the Waves of Culture. And in that book, they find that there are 8 dimensions of culture. So let's have a look at their model. So these are the 8 cultural dimensions found by Trompenaars and Hampden-Turner. There's you know, very little overlap really with Hofstede's dimensions. For example, there's no nothing really corresponds to power distance here, but we'll go through these. So they the first one is universalist, particularist. So does the culture like to think that there are rules that apply in every situation and the rules cannot be challenged? Or that would be universalist. Or particularist is, well, there are rules, but you know, we can adapt them to the situation. We can be flexible. We look at the actual circumstances and don't just mindlessly apply the rules are the rules. The next dimension is individualist communitarian. So this is, which is emphasized, the freedom of the individual to follow their own path, or is it people's responsibility to others, to the community? So which is more important, the needs of the individual or the needs of the community? The third dimension is neutral versus effective. So do people try to hold in their emotions and not show what they're feeling, or do they let it all hang out and are very demonstrative and emotional? The fourth dimension, specific, diffuse. So this is about, are people's social roles specific to particular situations, or is the role that you have in life apply in every situation? So a particular example of this is your boss. Is your boss just in work? Or is your boss even outside work? So if you met your boss, you would still defer to them in the same way. Some cultures would see, you know, your boss is your boss in all situations, whereas others, your boss is only your boss in work, and outside on the golf course and things, you can be more friendly. The next dimension is achievement, ascription. So this is, does the respect people get depend on what they have themselves achieved, on their merit? We look up to people because of what they've done. You can achieve status by doing good things, or is it ascribed to you based on your membership of a particular group or social class? So you know, your social standing is just a matter of what you're born into. The sixth dimension is internal, external. So this is about, if it's internal, it means you have a belief that what happens to you in life is something that you have control over. You are the master of your own destiny. That's an internal orientation. And then external is, it's just fate. What happens to you in life is just the will of the gods. That's the external view. And then time orientation, so this can be oriented towards the past, the present, or the future. So if it's oriented towards the present, it means you just live in the present, you live for today. Whereas if your orientation is towards the past, history is very important for you, your heritage, so how you behave is based on where you think you've come from and your ancestry and so on. Whereas orientation towards the future is where you're going. Your behavior is dictated by your vision of where you want to be, and everything is working towards some future dream. And the last cultural dimension is sequence synchronicity. So this is whether people in the culture like to do things one after the other in an orderly sequence, or whether they're happy to do things, have many things going on at the same time. Synchronicity, simultaneous and overlapping activities. So that might be a bit like the Italian delicatessen. It would be more content with synchronicity. The shopkeeper serving multiple customers at the same time. Anybody who wants mortadella, yes, you, and you. And who wants gorgonzola, oh, you and you. So they're dealing with things simultaneously, as opposed to people who like to queue and do things in a sequence. And if you look at their books, you'll see how they characterize all different cultures along these different dimensions, and they, have got charts showing where cultures are on these different measures, as has Hofstede. And Hofstede also has a website where you can, put countries in and see where they score on his dimensions. Now let's consider another way of classifying cultures that was originally popularised by Nietzsche and was then taken up by the anthropologist Ruth Benedict in a book called Patterns of Culture, which is a classic, Patterns of Culture. And according to this, there are two basic types of culture which are named after Greek gods. So they are Apollo and Dionysus. Apollo, the god of the sun, and Dionysus, the god of wine. And the Apollonian type cultures are said to be rational. It's all about, rational approaches to life. Whereas the Dionysian cultures are emotional. They feel life. In Apollonian cultures, the sort of orientation is to the above, the higher world, whereas the Dionysian cultures are inworldly. What we actually do in the world. So to elaborate on those a bit, in the Apollonian culture, by above, that means their interest is in abstractions, mathematical ideals. It's in logic. And the idea is that knowledge comes from above. There are deep truths, or there are important truths. So it's top-down knowledge. Truth is out there, it exists, and it comes down to us. And so there's a belief in sky gods. The divinity is above us, in the sky. So this is this above orientation. Truth comes to us from the sky gods above. Whereas in the Dionysian cultures, their focus is not on these abstract ideas, but on life, living, matter. And the real world, reality. these abstractions, but what do we actually do? And then the Russian philosopher Alexander Dugin has come along and said, well, actually, no, there's a third type of culture which he would add to this. And he names that after the Sibyl, which was the Greek prophetess, or they're Greek prophetesses, and he suggests that this is the feminine principle and is kind of dark, mysterious. So in this original two-part classification of Apollonian versus Dionysian cultures, the Apollonian was tended to be thought of as kind of the masculine principle and the Dionysian as the feminine principle. But Dugin is saying, let's put that to Dugin, Alexander Dugin. He says, no, the Sibyl is the feminine principle, the true feminine, the real feminine power. So the Sibyl prophetesses, they were prophetesses, and their acolytes were eunuchs, castrated males. So in the world of the Sibyls, it was very much about feminine power. The male was completely absent. So this is a pure feminine, he says, whereas the Dionysian is a kind of dual, a masculine feminine balance, men and women together. So this is a masculine, this is a male female balance, and then this is the true feminine power. So he says this is also the world of below. So its idea is of that of the great goddess, the great mother goddess, the great earth mother, and she is the creator but also the destroyer through feminine power. So she's the source of life, but she's also the destination of life. She's where life comes from, but she's also where life goes. He says this principle contains everything within her. And then Dugin also argues then that these aren't just two types of culture. So we can't just say, oh, that culture's Apollonian, that culture's Dionysian, and that culture's Sibylline. But all cultures have some mixture of these. So all cultures have a bit Apollonian, a bit Dionysian, and a bit Sibylline. But it's precisely the mix affects the overall character of the culture. So it's kind of a cultural triangle, if you like. That we've got the Apollonian, the Dionysian, and the Sibylline, and a particular culture will be somewhere within this triangle. It will be some mixture of these three cultural principles, cultural dimensions. And to give an example, Dugin argues for the West, he says, well, it's a kind of mixed thing in it's religion and philosophy. The West is more Apollonian, whereas in its politics and technology, it's more Sibylline. So he's arguing that, you know, Western technology is dark, mysterious, and its politics as well. So he sees it as this sort of powerful creator-destroyer approach of Western politics imposing itself around the world and its technology of nuclear weapons and what have you. And he says, whereas Russia he sees as Dionysian type culture. And so he argues that then this is why the West will never understand Russia and will always be in conflict with Russia, because they're in very different places along these cultural dimensions. So the West is sort of somewhere over here and Russia is right over there. So they'll never understand each other, according to Dugin. And now for our last approach to classifying cultures, we'll consider the ideas of Sorokin in his social and cultural dynamics. So for Sorokin there were three cultural types, but these were two basic types, so let's put three types. The first was what he called sensate. So this is the world of the senses, of sensations. In this kind of culture, the idea is that the visible world is the ultimate reality. Reality is what we can see, touch, taste, feel. So these cultures are materialist, is another way we could put it. And they're pragmatic. They're dealing with the real world and the real problems of the world in realistic ways. Then the second basic type of culture for Sorokin is what he calls the ideational. So for these types of cultures, they believe that the world is an illusion, that there is a higher reality, a reality beyond this world that we see. And so the world is less important to them. It's the reality beyond that's really important. So whereas sensate cultures focus on just enjoying the world as it is, these thinking about the higher reality are less interested in the pleasures of the world. They tend to be ascetic. And they also are morally absolutist. So in believing in a higher reality, they see the rules as how we live coming from that higher reality, and so they must be obeyed. Whereas the sensate cultures saying, well, that the world is the ultimate reality and we can adapt the rules to suit ourselves. For the ideational cultures, that's very wrong. We adapt ourselves to meet the rules of the higher reality, not adapting the rules to our needs. And I said there were three types because Sorokin also recognizes the possibility of a mixed type that has features of both, and that he calls idealist. And some of the people who've written about his ideas have said it's not really clear why he introduced this third type, the idealist type, because it's not very clear in his writings what its significance is. But I suppose he found that to try to make a hard and fast distinction that culture is sensate and that is ideational often didn't really work. And he had to say, well, it's kind of got mixtures of both. So he had to recognize this third possibility. So this is a combination of each of the above. And Sorokin was particularly interested in cultural change. So he wasn't just saying that this culture is different from that culture. He was interested in how particular cultures evolved over time. And his approach was to look at things like painting or works of philosophy, and by examining them, examine the kinds of values that they represented, and then saw how they changed over time. So, for example, in painting, you might see a lot of religious painting. Emphasis on religious painting would tell you that you're dealing with an ideational type of culture. Whereas if painting is of people and fruit and countryside scenes and so on, that tells you you're dealing with sensate culture. And so he went through masses of works, or with his students he did, and scored these, and he found that there was a change over the course of Western civilization. So starting here in 500 BC, we'll put 0, AD 500, 1000, 1500 up to the present. Of course, Sorokin was working in the mid 20th century. He only got as far as about 1900. But what he found was that there had been a swing from sensate to ideational and back again over the course of Western civilization, if we attach Western civilization onto classical civilization, which people like Spengler would say we shouldn't. It's a separate thing. But Sorokin, like most people at that time, saw Western civilization as just an outgrowth or continuation of classical civilization. So if we put ideational up here and sensate below, then Sorokin found that in Roman times it was pretty sensate, but as Christianity came to dominate, West became more ideational, but towards the Renaissance it swung back to a sensate materialist type culture, and then he suggested there was an upswing starting in the 20th century, and the West was moving back towards a more ideational worldview. And as I say, this is I've obviously just drawn it arbitrarily, but Sorokin actually plotted this based upon his counts of, as I said, paintings and philosophy books and scientific treatises, and scoring them as to where they are on this sensate ideational dimension. And he actually went into more detail as well than just this contrast between sensate and ideational. So, for example, in what he called systems of truth, so ideas about where truth comes from, he identified a number of different types of philosophy. Fideism, that truth is based on faith. Empiricism. Truth is based on, experiment, empirical reality. That's where we're going to get truth from, by testing and seeing. And skepticism. So skeptical about the whole idea of the ability to establish truth. And there are others as well. I think he has 6 different types of systems of truth. So he scored them along these 6 dimensions, not just the 3 or these 2 basic types. So if you look at his work, you can see in much more detail how he saw these different ways of thinking about the world swinging backwards and forwards over the course of Western civilization and also other civilizations that he looked at, Oriental civilization, for example.